Ray Charles said, "I was born with music inside me, and that's the only explanation that I know of." Have you seen the film? How many of you have seen Ray? Okay, good, all right. It was actually watching this Oscar-winning film again, starring Jamie Foxx, who, by the way, embodies him. I mean, is there. That sparked my interest in exploring this sermon about Ray Charles Robinson. I learned quite a bit in the process. Ray Charles Robinson was born on September 23rd, 1930 in Albany, Georgia, a Virgo, I might add, like myself. The son of Aretha Williams Robinson, a sharecropper, and Bailey Robinson, a railroad repairman, mechanic, and handyman. When Ray was an infant, his family moved from Albany, Georgia, where he was born, to the poor black community on the western side of Greenville, Florida. And it was in this community where at just 6 years of age, Ray witnessed his younger brother, George, fall into his mother's wash basin and drown. Now, Ray had begun to lose his sight actually at 5, and it was less than a year after this incident, the movie says conveniently 9 months, that he was completely blinded by glaucoma. Ray Charles experienced a lot of early death in his life. Just 4 years after his younger brother died, his father passed away. And 5 years later, when Ray was just 15, living at a school for the blind and deaf 160 miles away from home, his mother also died. In Ray's autobiography, he very clearly cites that what launched him into a deep depression and put him in his early drug use was in fact his mother's death. He was essentially alone at 15. And Charles wrote, "I knew then that my world had ended." Now, in the film and in Ray's memoirs, Aretha Robinson is depicted as a strong and hardworking woman who made her son promise her to never let nobody or no thing turn you into no cripple. His mother knew what Marlon was preaching about last week, that we can in fact participate in crafting our own identity. And we need to ask the question over and over and over again, who are we going to let define us? Now, one of the most powerful scenes from the film, you probably remember, demonstrates his mother's attempt to educate Charles in the ways of the world, to strengthen his resolve. It was a coming of age of sorts for him. Ray had just lost his sight, and one day his mother was in the house cooking, and when Ray came inside, he tripped. And he fell on the floor, and he was crying out for her. It's painful to watch. She was silent. He's there crying on the floor and disoriented, calling out her name. And as she's holding in her tears and even her breath for a while, watching him carefully, eventually he stops wailing. And he really begins to listen. She watches as his listening orients him to his position in the room, the crackle of a cooking fire on one side, a pot across the room on a cast iron stove, the sounds of the people out the door and the window, a cricket on the floor that he locates and catches. And finally, calm and oriented, the breath of his own mother, who he tells, "I hear you, Mama. You're right there." It is a holy moment. And it takes me directly to our relationship with God. Here we are stumbling, falling, Genesis might say, through the world with a compassionate and loving God who is often silent, or at least requires us to stop wailing long enough to be able to hear. That subtlety of breath might just be the only thing we hear. And it is this deep listening and his keen memory that became Ray Charles' saving grace, that allowed him to walk without a cane, or to hear a hummingbird outside a noisy restaurant window, or to hear the difference in footsteps when he walks past a wall or an open door. To hear the music in the sounds of the world. And to hear the music that comes from his own being. The whole song, each and every note and harmony and instrument. The film really focuses on Ray's relationship with his mother, Aretha, but the truth is that Ray actually has written that he had two mothers. According to his biography, he insisted that there were two women who dominated his early years. His biological mother, Aretha, and a woman named Mary Jane, one of his father's former wives. Charles said, "I called Aretha Mama and Mary Jane Mother." They were two very different women who influenced Ray in two very different ways. Aretha fostered Charles's independence, like the story that we just heard about, while Mary Jane simply indulged him. For the rest of his life, Ray Charles was as fiercely self-reliant as he was self-indulgent. Two dynamic women, two radically different approaches to his sightlessness. You can imagine the impact on his character. And oh, how he loved women. Ray Charles experienced so much pain so young, in addition to the loss of his sight. So many chains on his body and on his heart. Ray found heroin actually on the road to ease his pain, an addiction that he wouldn't kick for 20 plus years. And his weakness for women and for womanizing was legendary. It is written of him that the man, even after heroin, was rarely without his signature cocktail, coffee, sugar, and gin. Ugh. He probably drank Red Bull and something today, is my guess. But like all legends, it's tough to separate the truth from the fiction. What we do know for sure is that he had 12 children and from 9 women. Financially, he supported them, but not really capable of emotionally supporting all of them. Charles struggled with infidelity throughout his life, or maybe I should say he didn't struggle with infidelity. Actually, he did that pretty well. He struggled with fidelity. But at one point in the film, just before Charles gave up heroin, Della, his longest relationship, his wife, mother of 3 of his children, said that Ray was married first and foremost to music. Thanks be to God. He was forever loyal to music. And it was his music, in fact, that saved him. It was his creativity and his orchestration, his deep desire to remove the chains from his heart and tame the world around him. Ray Charles orchestrated the world to meet his needs and to make incredible music. He was boisterous and could be controlling, and he was often difficult to work with, but he also surrounded himself with the best. But with so many chains on his heart, still Ray Charles could sing about love and joy as well as sadness and pain. There is something, I believe, in our soul that recognizes another soul who has touched pain or grief or intense sadness and chooses to hope anyway. Chooses to love anyway. There's something that resonates in our soul with people when they are like that. And it is from this place that Ray's music met the world. Ray Charles could sing of love or pain, hope or sadness, crafting each note to support the emotion, and he could sing patriotic angst like no one's business. Ray Charles's rendition of America the Beautiful is unparalleled. He reflected the complexity of the relationship of Black America to this country and the relationship of post-Vietnam Americans to this country, as well as a deep and profound affection for this country in one song. But before Ray Charles learned to break all the rules, he first had to learn all the rules. As a boy, Ray learned to sing first and foremost in the New Shiloh Baptist Church in Greenville, Florida. And he also learned how to play a little bit of piano and sing at Mr. Wiley Pitt's Red Wing Cafe, where Pitt played boogie woogie on an upright piano and taught Ray what he knew. At the St. Augustine School for the Deaf and the Blind, Charles revealed himself as a child musical prodigy. He was trained to play piano, but Charles also quickly learned to play a myriad of other instruments, including the alto saxophone, clarinet, trumpet, organ, and drums. He learned to read, write, and arrange music in Braille. During this time, he also performed on the WFOY radio station in St. Augustine. And in school, Charles was taught only classical music. But what he really wanted was to play the jazz and the blues that he heard on family radio. Now, while at school there, he became the school's premier musician. On Fridays, they would hold assemblies where Charles would play piano and sing popular songs just to highlight his talent. On Halloween and Washington's birthday, what was then called the colored department of the school had socials where Charles would play. And it was there at that school that he established the R.C. Robinson and the Shop Boys band, his first band of sorts. He spent the first Christmas at the school, but later the staff pitched in so that he could return to Greenville, as he did from then on each summer. In his early career, Charles played the piano for bands at the Ritz Theater for $4 a night. And then he moved to Orlando and later Tampa, where he played with a country and western band called the Florida Playboys. You see, Charles was adaptable and adaptive and capable of playing a variety of music successfully, but he wanted his own band. He decided to leave Florida for a large city, and after asking a friend to look at a map and tell him the largest city in the United States that was the farthest from Florida, he moved to Seattle in 1947. And it was in Seattle where he first befriended a 14-year-old Quincy Jones and soon started recording. He had his first hit with Confession Blues in 1949. The song soared to #2 on the R&B charts, and soon after he signed with Atlantic Records, where he was until 1958. At Atlantic, Charles began to explore his jazz, boogie-woogie, and blues influences with Mess Around. And then in 1954 added his church influence with I Got a Woman. I Got a Woman changed music because he took the African American church experience and put it on secular radio. And soul was born. NPR interviewer Tavis Smiley called Ray Charles the soul of black music. And that may be true, but he also brought soul to the world. By blending jazz and country and blues and blending it with church music, he brought the experience, the feeling of the African American church to the masses without the dogma. At a time when pop music was insufficient in its attempt to address the American human experience, Charles touched the woundedness of post-World War II segregated America with music that complemented the emotion of his words. He crossed color lines and went straight to the human heart. In the words of musicologist Henry Pleasance, he says, Ray Charles is a master of sounds. His records disclose an extraordinary assortment of slurs, glides, turns, shrieks, wails, breaks, shouts, screams, and hollers, all wonderfully controlled, disciplined by inspired musicianship, and harnessed to ingenious subtleties of harmony, dynamics, and rhythm. It is either the singing of a man whose vocabulary is inadequate to express what is in his heart and mind, or of one whose feelings are too intense for satisfactory verbal or conventionally melodic articulation. Because he can't tell it to you, he can't even sing it to you. He has to cry out to you or shout to you in tones eloquent of despair and exaltation. You see, Ray Charles demonstrated that the church does not have a monopoly on the human soul. African American church culture was created when African Americans took their African heritage and the pain of slavery to the Christian churches of the South. And Ray Charles Robinson took African American church culture into the secular world, translating it for an even broader audience, uninhibited by dogma. He was criticized, ostracized, told he was going to hell, told he was making money on the church, all because he had a bigger inclusive idea. Does that sound familiar? See, Ray Charles, like our beloved Bishop Carlton Pearson, was a border walker. A blend of his influences brought together black and white, secular and religious, country and jazz, blues and classical. Frank Sinatra called Charles the only true genius in show business. But you don't have to be a genius to be a border walker. You do not have to be a genius to be a border walker. We are all the blend of more than one culture. We are all the blend of more than one culture, even if it's just as simple as mom and dad. Everyone has the opportunity in their lives to walk between worlds and between cultures, even if it's just between work and home. What two worlds could you help bring together based on who you are and what you value and where you spend your time? How could you leverage who you are to join people or ideas that would likely not have come together otherwise? That is, in fact, I believe, part of the call on our lives in this world that cannot be ignored. How do I use who I am and the story that I have been given about my life, the heartbreak and the joy, and bring worlds together? Whether it's simply bringing together your family or whether it's bringing something together even bigger than that. The work is not to become stuck, though, right? Not to become stuck on one side or another, seeing it as a polarity, seeing it as only home way is right or only work way is right. It's both and, right? It's about a bigger and bigger umbrella of inclusion, right? So the work is to become not stuck on one side or the other. The work is to know who we are, to know our heritage, our story, our influences, our values, and to make choices about our behaviors based in our own integrity, regardless of the criticism. Regardless of the criticism. There's a part of me that believes actually that if you aren't being criticized, then you're not pushing yourself far enough. That you might not be risking enough. If someone's not at least a little bit uncomfortable, then maybe you're just maintaining the status quo. Have you given up at trying to fix your job, maybe? Or your mama? I'm just saying. Speaking from some experience. My mama's not here today. Or maybe, in fact, you are a peacemaker. Right? And you're being torn between worlds all the time, and it's driving you crazy because you're feeling torn in two or split in half. And if you feel like you're being split in half or torn in two, then you are probably sacrificing who you are for the cause. And you need to do your own work to figure out who you are before you start playing peacemaker. Being a border walker and not losing yourself in the process requires that you have a community. A community that feeds you, who celebrates you, who gives you space and permission to be who you are, who can forgive you when you mess up and can make space for you to experiment. Ray Charles had his music, and I think he could have used a community like ours. He was a border walker, and he turned to heroin and alcohol and marijuana and sex to cope with the stress and the difficulty of not only his pain and his disability and his loss, but also to cope with being a pioneering border walker. The pressure was huge. Charles helped racially integrate country and pop music during the 1960s with his crossover success on ABC Records, most notably with Modern Sounds. He was one of the first African-American musicians ever to be given artistic control by a mainstream record company. And he leveraged his power well to change the face of music and to get paid. And those are not exclusive. So throughout his career, Charles was active in a range of political and humanitarian causes. He provided financial support for Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement. He was also a staunch supporter of Israel. And grounded in his own fear of losing his hearing and his desire to help others, he also formed the Robinson Foundation for Hearing Disorders with $1 million personal endowment. Now, on March 15th, 1961, not long after releasing Georgia on My Mind, Charles was scheduled to perform at a dance at a Bell Auditorium in Augusta. And he canceled it after learning that the larger auditorium dance floor would be restricted to whites, while blacks would be obligated to sit in the music hall balcony. He immediately left town after letting the public know why he was not going to be performing there. The promoter sued Charles for breach of contract, and he was fined $757 in Fulton County Superior Court in Atlanta. Not too much to pay to desegregate Augusta, Georgia. According to the film, Charles was banned from performing thereafter in Georgia, but this was actually Hollywood embellishment, I found out. He was not, in fact, banned from Georgia, but he did perform again at a desegregated Bell Auditorium concert the following year with his backup group, the Raylettes, in 1963. So change did, in fact, happen. And later, Charles was one of the first of the Georgia State Music Hall of Fame to be recognized as a musician born in the state. And his 1981, his version of Georgia on My Mind was made the official state song of Georgia. Now, I was surprised at first to learn that one of Ray's favorite things to do, besides sing and play piano, was to play chess. Now, having examined his life this week, it now makes perfect sense to me. Ray Charles saw the world like a game of chess. He learned the rules of the game, and then he leveraged his power and the rules themselves to change his life. It reminds me actually of that book called The Art of Possibility. Does anybody know that book, The Art of Possibility? By Xander. I really hope that you'll pick it up. We sell it actually in the office. Our staff did it one year as a staff book together. But there's this concept in The Art of Possibility called be the board. When the way things are seem like they are offering no possibility, and you are at your absolute wit's end, you can rename yourself, says Xander, as the board on which the whole game is being played. With this act alone, you can transform everything. The first part of the practice is to recognize, I am the framework for everything that happens in my life. I am the meaning maker. If I cannot act effectively in my own life, if I feel that I've been wronged or I'm a loser or a victim, I will tell myself that some assumption that I have made may in fact be the source of my difficulty. And even if it's not true, because we're not talking about blaming the victim here, right? Even if it's not true, I can still claim the power that I have left to respond to it. Ray Charles demonstrated this in his life by what he accomplished based on the hand that he was dealt, right? The second part of this practice in the Art of Possibility is to ask yourself in regards to any unwanted circumstances, how did this show up on the board that I am? How did this land in my life? How did this circumstance end up in my field? Because being the board is not about turning the blame on yourself. It's about making a difference and designing conversations to repair any breakdown in relationship. So you name yourself as the primary instrument to make all of your relationships into effective partnerships. You choose to use the instrument that you were given to change the outcome. You open a channel of possibility by removing the barriers, by removing the chains to tenderness that are within yourself. And it starts by handling yourself and the world with gentle hands. Now, among the rewards of this, Xander believes, are self-respect, connection at the deepest and most vital kind, and a straight road to making a difference. When Ray Charles played chess, he used a special board with holes for the pieces so he could know where he was putting them, and with raised squares so that he could feel where the board was. Over his lifetime, he played with Willie Nelson. And he even had an opportunity to play Grandmaster and former U.S. champion Larry Evans. He lost, but I don't think that that was the point. Over the course of his career, Charles collected 17 Grammy Awards, 5 of them posthumously for his last studio album, 2004's Genius Loves Company. But what I'm taking away from Ray's life this morning, and what I offer to you, is how can you use the tool that you are to influence, to connect people and ideas? How are you a border walker? How can you consider a wider and wider understanding of inclusion that finds a way to include more and more extremes or polarities? What I take away this morning is that we must find the balance between self-reliance and self-indulgence, or be blinded by them both. We have to be the board and leverage all the power that we've been given to change our lives and the world. What Ray Charles reminds me this morning is that when we unchain the human heart, when we can tap into our own brokenness and truly listen, anything is possible. Amen.